Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
Hey, this is David Iser from DMXS Radio, and you are about to get roosted in the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazer, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at the 1980 Yamaha YZ250. Now, I love these bikes back in the day. I mean, I never rode one. I was too little when this bike came out. I was only 10, but I thought they were the coolest looking machines around. I really didn't understand much about motocross. One of my neighbors had a like maybe a 78 or 79 YZ used to ride around, and let me ride on the back of that once or twice, but I really wasn't into motocross or any great detail. But I just thought this machine looked cool. I love the looks of the original monoshock. Even to this day, I think it's a really iconic, really cool looking design. You can see I have it on one of these on my shirts. The bike itself in 1980, even though it looks very similar to a 1979, is actually a totally different machine. They made a lot of changes. This original Yamaha monoshock, it was very revolutionary when it came out in the mid-70s, but by 1980, the tides were turning a bit. All the manufacturers getting ready to move, or had moved in case of Kawasaki, to a linkage suspension system. Yamaha kept this going until 81. Then 82, they finally went with a linkage design, although it was still a weird combination of the original mono and the new linkage designs. It wasn't really as... I don't think at that point they were ready to go quite all in on the whole lower link monoshock design like Honda was using with the Pro Link. But this original mono, it was a great performer early on. It had its little quirks. There was issues where the shock being up so high on the chassis gave the bikes kind of a top-heavy feel, and also had a weird thing where if you hit a bump and the gas was off, the chassis tended to pendulum forward really suddenly, and they had what they called Yamaha hop, and these bikes would kind of suddenly swap on you if you weren't careful. But at the time, again, when they first were introduced, they were really revolutionary machines. By 1980, though, Yamaha was trying to do some tweaks to keep up with the competition. Some years more successful than others. In 1980, though, they really did a good job with this. They made some significant upgrades to the chassis. The motor was new, all new. It's actually a one-year design. It has a 6-speed transmission, which is not something you see in 250s very often at all. In 1981, they went back to the 5-speed, so this is kind of a unique machine. But it was a great bike in 1980. It was a really good machine, and even though this was kind of getting towards the end of the original monoshock run, Yamaha had a really good overall design here in 1980, and it was certainly one of the best, if not the best, bike in the 250 class. If you'd like to support what I do, I have Motocross Vault merch available, including this Yamaha shirt that I'm wearing right now with the 1976 Toyota truck on it. I've done several designs with different motorcycle and truck combinations, motorcycles by themselves, all kinds of stuff there. I just came out with a new Honda/Ricky Carmichael design based on the 2002 CR some people had asked me to do. Really iconic motorcycle, great looking bike even to this day. So if you'd like to pick up some merch, they are available on my Teespring store. I will put a link in the description below and also a card here in the video. So here, without further ado, is the story of the 1980 Yamaha YZ250G. The 1970s were a great decade for Yamaha. They helped usher in the off-road explosion in America with the DT1 Enduro at the start of the decade, and kicked off the suspension revolution with their game-changing monoshocks in 1975. From the time they introduced the Works replica YZs in May of 1973, they consistently remained at the top of the motocross charts in America. Multiple Supercross and National Motocross titles, including a sweep of all 4 major championships in 1978, stood as proof of Yamaha's performance pedigree in the 70s. As the decade of the 80s approached, however, the motocross landscape began to change. With laid-down long-travel dual shocks being the norm and rising rate single shocks on the horizon, Yamaha's monos were no longer the significant advantage they had once been. Tall, top-heavy, and notorious for their affection for sudden, unexpected swaps, the monos' days at the top of the sport were coming to a close. Seeing the writing on the wall, Yamaha set out in 1980 to try and address some of the more significant complaints riders had with the original monoshock design. Chief among these were the bike's quirky handling and the shock's propensity for fading. In order to achieve the impressive travel figures of the original monoshock, Yamaha laid its large single damper down the length of the frame. The shock ran all the way from the swing arm to the base of the steering head and was housed in a tube that doubled as the frame's backbone. While this provided a significant travel advantage, it also buried the shock deep inside the bodywork, away from any cooling air. This placement also meant that a lot of heavy components were mounted up high in the frame. This made the damper prone to premature fading and gave the machine a top-heavy feel on the track. In order to rectify these issues, Yamaha dialed up an all-new monoshock design for 1980. Although the basic configuration remained very similar, nearly everything else about it was all new. The new design retained the lay-down arrangement and large triangular swing arm of 1979, but added a new shock that was lighter and more compact than before. The new damper was crafted out of aluminum to save weight and featured a remote reservoir for the first time. A tried and true trick of the aftermarket, this reservoir increased the overall oil capacity of the shock and improved fade resistance by placing the remote canister on the frame down tube where it could get lots of cooling air. By offloading some of the oil capacity to the remote reservoir, Yamaha was also able to reduce the overall length of the shock significantly. This allowed them to further improve cooling by moving the shock out of the frame backbone and mounting it directly to the frame. Because the shock was shorter, it was also placed slightly lower on the frame, also improving handling. To further lower the center of gravity, Yamaha moved the spring from the top of the shock to the bottom and installed a tapered spring to save a few more ounces. As a side benefit, this also made tuning it much easier by allowing preload and damping adjustments to be made without removing the shock. In order to accommodate this new rear suspension, Yamaha had to dial up an all-new chassis for 1980. The new chromoly steel frame deleted the double cradle of 1979 and replaced it with a single large down tube to increase strength and reduce flex. Without the need to house the shock, the frame's backbone was smaller in diameter and made of thicker tubing. This helped address one of the weak points of the 77 through 79 frames, which had suffered from cracks in this area. Overall, the new frame was lighter, stronger, more compact, and tuned to improve steering response over the previous model. On the motor side of things, the YZ250G's 246cc power plant was just as new as the rest of the machine. While the bore and stroke remained unchanged from 1979, the rest of the motor was a complete redesign. The new cases on the G model were far smaller than the F had been, and this gave the mill an almost 125-like appearance. Inside that shrunken bottom end was an all-new transmission that housed 6 speeds, and a new shift drum that was added to improve shifting action. In the top end, the G model used a lightweight aluminum cylinder with a cast-in steel liner and 2-ring piston. Internal porting was new for 1980, with a repositioning of the exhaust port and a freer breathing reed valve. The reed's material remained stainless steel, but it opened 3mm farther for 1980 to increase the flow from the 38mm McCuney mixer. Finishing off the power package was an all-new airbox, a redesigned pipe, and a larger and quite loud steel silencer. Even though the 1980 YZ looked very similar to 1979, the new model featured all new bodywork from stem to stern. The new fenders were thinner, lighter, and slightly wider. There was a new seat which offered a slightly lower seating position, and a new tank that looked the same as 1979, but was not interchangeable with the old model. The FIM mandated extended side plates remained, but they featured a revised shape and a slightly cleaner appearance. In terms of performance, the 1980 YZ250G turned out to be a significant upgrade over the F model in almost all respects. The new chassis was nimbler and felt lighter than any YZ since the featherweight original in 1974. Turning was also much improved over the 79 model, and the bike tracked straight in the rough as long as you kept the power on. If you backed off, the G model still exhibited the occasional Yamaha swap, but it was far less frequent than in the past. Overall, most testers felt that the YZ250G offered the best handling package in the 250 class in 1980. On the motor front, the new YZ offered a much more potent power package than in 1979. The new G motor lacked the solid low-end torque of the YZ250F, but it made up for it with a strong mid-range and blistering top-end pull. Off the line it was purely pedestrian, but once it climbed onto the pipe, it waved bye-bye to every other machine in the class. Because of its lack of torque and abrupt hit, it was tricky to keep on the pipe and far more demanding to ride than the mellower 79 version had been. Out of corners, the front end of the YZ tended to get very light, and if you whacked up in the throttle suddenly, the potent mid-range blast could put you on your head. This made the bike a bit of a handful for novices, but a potent weapon for those with the skill to make the most of its awesome power. On the suspension end of things, the new G model offered a very impressive 11.8 inches of travel from its 38mm Kiaba forks. This was an increase of over an inch over 1979. The new forks offered no external adjustments for compression or rebound damping, but they did allow for some fine-tuning through the use of Schrader valves placed at the top of each fork. If you wanted to change the fork's damping, the only option was to change the volume and viscosity of the oil. Out back, the new monoshock offered the same 11.8 inches of travel as the front forks. This was nearly 1.5 inches more than 1979. External adjustments were limited to spring preload and a 24-position rebound clicker at the base of the shock. Compression damping was set at the factory and could not be altered without changing the shock's internals. On the track, the YZ250G suspension proved to be some of the best in the business in 1980. Both ends were quite plush, with excellent control and good bottoming resistance. By modern standards, both ends were quite soft, but by the standards of the time, they were more than adequate for racing anywhere below the pro class. As long as you kept the power on, the new mono tracked straight and true, gobbling up whoops and stutters easily. With this new remote reservoir, fading was much improved, and the shock maintained consistent damping far longer than before. Pros, of course, were likely to opt for a Fox, White Brothers, or Luft shock, but for the average Joe, it was an excellent damper. On the detailing front, the new YZ250G was very good for its time. Cool little dimples molded into the hand levers, form-fit your fingers, and made them very comfortable. The alloy rear brake lever was just as trick as the hand levers, and featured a wraparound design that snaked inside the frame rails and looked like something off of Bob Hanna's Works Racer. The brakes themselves were a mixed bag, with a strong front and a mediocre rear. The full floating rear, in particular, annoyed riders with its propensity to chatter and become grabby when hot. For once, the tank decals actually lasted past the first ride, and proved far more durable than in the past. The bike was also narrower than the Honda and Suzuki, a side benefit of the monoshock design. Even though it did not change much visually from 79, most people at the time approved of the Yamaha's classic looks. The new fenders offered better mud protection and appeared much more elegant than the heavily braced 79 units. The big alloy swing arm on the YZ looked cool and rarely suffered from failures, something that could not be said of much of the YZ's competition. The new lower seat height and revised bar bend were appreciated by those of shorter stature, but anyone over 6 feet tall was likely to find the new ergonomics very cramped. Even though the overall bike was pretty great for 1980, there were a few quibbles. The clutch, while durable, was an absolute bear to use. It felt much more like something from a European 500 than the typical Japanese 250 and gave riders hand cramps in short order. With its 6-speed transmission and potent output, the YZ was incredibly versatile, but prone to constant pinging on pump gas. If you wanted to keep your yellow missile in one piece, running race gas was a smart move. The new airbox also proved problematic, with a tendency to eject the cover's bottom screw and let all manner of detritus in. It was best to check this constantly and add a bead of silicone for added insurance. Overall, the 1980 YZ250G stands as a high watermark for the original monoshock YZs, the culmination of half a decade of refinement and innovation. With the coming arrival of linkages and rising rate rears, its days were numbered, but in 1980, it still had what it took to propel the YZ to the top. With a powerful pro-oriented motor, sharp handling, and superb suspension, the YZ250G was the class of the field in 1980, and a fitting way to finish off a decade of Yamaha excellence. So there you have it. That's a look back at the 1980 Yamaha YZ250G, a machine that was very successful in the track, a bike that, man, I just would drooled over in 1980. Again, I wasn't really into motorcycles in the same way I was when I was a little older, but a good buddy of mine had street bikes, and actually he took me to the local Yamaha dealership in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, which is no longer there anymore. I think it was Cycle Sport maybe, but it's been a long time ago. But I remember looking at the YZs. They had all the YZs lined up, you know, from 465 all the way down to the little 50s and 60s. And they had the number one plates on the front, the big number one. And I just thought that was so cool. I know people actually to deal with those things hated them because they didn't want to come off very easily. But I thought it was neat. You know, I didn't know the significance of them. I just thought it was cool. I remember looking at that 465 and just looking how just toweringly huge it was, and I couldn't fathom how anybody could ride that thing. And you know, it was just a really cool machine. Again, I didn't really have the understanding of whether it was any good on the track. I just thought it looked cool, and I wanted a little 80 or a 50 so bad back then, but my parents were just not into motorcycles at all. They were definitely not down for that. So I just had to look at it longingly. This machine, though, it certainly was a unique motorcycle. It's, as I said, it's basically a one-year design. They changed the motor around a year after this. They went to the larger forks. They ditched the 41 millimeter forks and went to 43s in 1981. And the bike actually was probably better in some ways, but unfortunately, you also had this influx of all new technology hitting the class in 1981, where you had Yamaha introduce where you had Suzuki introducing the full floater, Honda with their ProLink. Kawasaki was kind of getting their Unitrack sorted out. So this old-fashioned monoshock was really starting to look, you know, quote-unquote old-fashioned at that point. And they did make some, you know, tweaks in 81, but the writing was on the wall. Everything was moving forward towards linkages, and this Yamaha design had kind of reached the end of its development life cycle. In 1982, they would go to the linkage design. But I think probably this 1980 is probably the high watermark of that original like run of YZs with the original monoshock. It was a good machine, class-winning machine, and won a lot of shootouts. and certainly very competitive on the track. So if you like this sort of thing, again, if you can check out other videos on the channel, like, subscribe, share on social media, I would very much appreciate it. Help people find the channel. I do the best I can here to put interesting content. I know it's a very niche market. There aren't a bazillion guys looking to hear about classic motorcycles out there, but everything you guys do to help share the stuff I do, I very much appreciate it. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace. Hello, it's Tony Blazer. I'm the man behind the Motocross Vault, and I wanted to take a quick second just to tell you about one of the exciting projects I'm involved with for 2021. Last fall, Ken Fott, who was a longtime editor of Dirt Rider, Jennifer Emig, and Grant Langston came to me and actually offered an opportunity to become a partner with a new business venture they were working on, Speed and Sport Adventures. And what Speed and Sport is a high-end opportunity to go on adventure rides with famous athletes from the off-road and motocross community. Our first ride is going to take place in Park City in 2021, and Guy Cooper and Grant Langston are going to be the tour guides for this ride. We're going to be staying at a very high-end resort. You're going to be able to hit the trail with these guys, bench race with them, spend a couple of days with your heroes. I know that kind of thing. It really got me excited. It's something I would love to do. And our first ride will be with Grant Langston and Guy Cooper at Park City. And I'd love you to take a look at our website, get an idea what we're doing there, and see if it might be something you might be interested in. The website is speedandsportadventures.com. I'll put a link in the description below if you'd like to check it out and you might be interested in going on one of these adventure rides. We'll be expanding this over time, adding new riders and what have you. But I think it's a really, really fun opportunity for somebody who loves motocross and off-road riding. It's not going to be, obviously, a real high, intense ride. It's more like a pleasure-type deal. But I think it's something that would appeal to certainly a guy like me, older. I'm not looking to go kill myself on the bike anymore, but it'd be cool to spend a couple days with these guys. So, in any case, speedandsportadventure.com, and I appreciate all the support everybody gives me.